I'm going to introduce perhaps the most important player in this potential revolution in healthcare and health promotion. Without the participation of the public, meeting their needs, understanding their needs first of all, and without them taking up these technologies, the rest of it is really quite meaningless. So I'm going to introduce today some results from our LipGene project, which Mike mentioned, our Framework 6 project, and introduce to you the consumer and their perspectives on personalised nutrition. Now, there's a lack of research in this area. I could only find two studies, two seminal studies on this area, one published by the LipGene group and the other by another group who are joining us in the Food for Me project, which is the Framework 7 project, which there's a large group here involved in that too. Now, the Food for Me project is going to look at the public perception of personalised nutrition in a very, very big way. A very major part of that study is looking at what the public want, what they need, and how to provide it. So this talk today, the short talk, is by way of introducing Food for Me through LipGene. It's well known, what little research there is has shown that there are LCs, there are ethical, legal, and social issues associated with personalised nutrition and with nutrigenomics generally. And we need to look at these. We knew at the stage of LipGene that we needed to look at some of these issues in detail with the public. So the aims and objectives of our LipGene study was to determine European opinion of a whole range of issues related to health promotion. There were two large studies, one which was qualitative, which took place in Northern Ireland and in Portugal. And as a second part of that study, leading on from the qualitative research, a questionnaire was designed on the basis of the qualitative findings and a large 6-country survey carried out in Europe. So looking at some of the qualitative findings, first of all, we asked consumers in Portugal and Britain what they thought of the notion of personalised nutrition, and we found that there were positive and negative views. There were these conflicting views. Some people were very open to it, other people were a bit neutral, but some people were quite negative. They were scared. They would be worried about what would be said, what they would be told. So even though John has talked about the 1 in 10 TTs, of that 1 in 10 there might be maybe 30% of them who really don't want to know the genetic genotype. So the thing gets even more complicated as we look deeper. We also asked major stakeholders what they thought about nutrigenomics in the future. And we asked insurers because the idea of handling information and using it for insurance was one of the factors that the consumers were quite concerned about. And we got some reassurance on that. Insurers are not allowed to use these data. They're not allowed to use this sort of information. One of the product developers we spoke to even thought that this was a technology that children were ideally placed to take up. It was a lifelong commitment. But there is this layer of ethics and issues, and this is what we wanted to ask consumers about in our survey. So we had a questionnaire, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but just to say that we looked at attitudes to nutrigenomics as one of the factors in the questionnaire. The survey took place in 6 European countries, thought to be representative of Europe: north, south, east, and west. So France, Germany, Italy, Britain, Portugal, and Poland. And we had Maury GB who did the fieldwork, and we did some quite complex analysis. As you can see, one of the packages we used was M+, which is an American package. So I have to apologise that some of the graphs you're going to see now are produced in an American package, and they're a little bit faint. Anyway, we had a representative sample in each of the countries. So we have a variation in the proportion of males and females and so on, all sorts of variables. These are large representative samples, and the study is unique for that. So we thought, what are we going to ask consumers about? We said, what might consumers want from personalised nutrition? Well, they might want to know their genetic risk, just for the sake of it. Maybe for future generations. And this may be actually the key. It may not even be the 1 in 10 that's interested in this. It could be that they want to hand something down to their children. Disease prevention. This might have been an Irishman. Healthy dietary changes. For tailored health messages. And this is where Food for Me are really, really going to investigate, this idea of giving advice online. Or just for peace of mind. So we asked people first of all, how willing were they to undergo genetic testing? And we found that essentially 65%, more than 2/3 of these 6,000 people would be willing to have a genetic test, certainly under certain conditions. Only 24% would refuse. This varied by EU country, though. If we look at the 6 countries here, the green bar are people who would want to follow a personalised diet as well as have a test. And we can see that a lot of people would have a test here, but a lot of them wouldn't want to use it for dietary health. And we've got differences between countries. If we look at Germany, Germany would be least likely to want to personalise their diet for health. So we've got inter-country differences here. We need to look at those in more detail. We looked at attitudes, and here are some of the attitude statements generated from the prior qualitative research. And we first of all asked people as a filter question, how interested were they in understanding their genetic risk? If they answered no to that question, we then tapped into their attitudes. Some people in the qualitative suggested that changing their lifestyle was enough to get health benefit, that they didn't need to be tested, they didn't need to engage in these personalised nutrition initiatives, that just to lead a healthy lifestyle and get on with it. Some people felt that life was to be lived to the full and that you didn't need to worry about these things. Other people just weren't interested. Some worried that the personalised foods might be developed in ways that they perceived to be unhealthy, such as through genetic modification. And some worried about how this information, not just the genotypic information, but the phenotypic health history, how the information might be used by various factions, including the police, the employers, and the insurers. So we thought to ask these consumers what they thought about these. And again, we found vast differences between the different countries, between the different ages, and between sexes. So the thing gets more and more complex as the deeper we look. In order to simplify this, now we've talked about clusters in some of the previous talks and about targeting clusters of people based on their phenotypic data and their genetic data. Well, I'm going to suggest we also need to target people based on clusters of opinion. So we did a latent class analysis, which looks for clusters in opinion and looks for groups, patterns, who have some sort of homogeneous viewpoint. So we developed a model for the whole sample and for each of the 6 countries. And we find very good explanatory power for these models, from 74 to 98%. So when you're looking at these models that I'm going to present now, remember that these are very strong, very, very strong. So looking at the whole 6,000 plus sample, we found 3 groups. So what were these groups? The first one was a relatively small group of about 3 to 4% of the 6,000 who were skeptical. We're calling them the skeptics here because more than a third of these people were concerned that the foods could be developed through genetic modification and weren't happy with that idea. And more than half were also concerned about how the information that they provided could subsequently be used. So these are skeptics. It's a relatively small group, though, and we need legislation here. I don't know whether there's anyone from government actually here, but I think in the application of personalised nutrition there are legislative issues. We can discuss these later. Anyway, more than a third of this group, despite being skeptic, agreed that it would be good to know your genetic risk. So although they were open to the idea of finding out, they were they were worried about how the information would be used and about how the foods would be produced. So we had another group that were nearly half of the sample, 48%, who just didn't seem to care one way or another. And this might be the most important group here because they're relatively large. And they just don't know. They're sitting on the fence. It'll be interesting to see in the Food for Me analysis whether we still have this group. But these are potentially the people that we can persuade or dissuade from engaging in personalised nutrition. About 10 to 15% of these people said that it was just enough to change their lifestyle. So this was a group who felt living healthy was enough. And as far as the rest of it was concerned, they weren't really too interested. More than half of the sample we described as keen, because 90% of them agreed it was good to know their genetic risk, and they didn't seem terribly worried about any of the issues. Only a small group were worried about how the foods might be produced. So we then went and did the latent class analysis again within each of the 6 countries, and I'm going to just flick through that briefly for you. Before we do, these are the various entropy values for the models for the 6 countries, and we can see here that there's quite a range around the whole sample, but we have in Poland, we've got a 90%, more than 90% strength of the model. More than 90% of the data are explained by these latent classes. Okay. France had the lowest, but still anything over 70 is a very strong model. Looking at Poland, and looking at this, we're finding these three groups coming through again. And this group of skeptics came through in every one of the samples, every one of the countries. So every single country had a relatively small group of skeptics. And a slightly below half who didn't care, and slightly more than half who were keen. So Poland were typical, pretty much typical of the whole sample. Again, in Germany, with the skeptics, we've those that don't care, and we've those that are keen. Now, there's a difference here in a larger proportion of the German sample were skeptical. There was nearly 8% as opposed to 3.5% in some roundabouts in the other countries. So Germany are different here. Italy, again, fewer skeptics. They had more who were keen. So although the 3 groups are coming through in all of these countries, the proportions are slightly different. Again, in Portugal, we had quite a large keen group. They seemed very, very open to this personalised nutrition. 82% were in the keen group. And again, France is, again, the 3 groups. GB had a lot of skeptics, but also a largest group that don't care. They had nearly 60% who just didn't care, NUE in Great Britain. One country's missing from all this, and it's Ireland. And I think this is something else we need to be looking at. We need to be doing this sort of work in Ireland. We're such a small peripheral country in Europe that we don't tend to get into these pan-European surveys. The summary of the latent class analysis, again, just to highlight these differences, you can see that in Germany with a large group of skeptics, and in Portugal a very large group who just don't care. Sorry, they just don't care. So this is probably, as I said, the most important group. Moving on from those clusters of opinion, and just to throw something else at you, we studied these people and their opinions, but we also asked them about their medical history. And this was self-reported data, but it's also interesting to look that once people know they have a problem, like as John was discussing the high blood pressure perhaps, once they know they have a problem, attitudes change. So this again suggests that perhaps in promoting personalised nutrition, we need to promote people who maybe have a family history of a disease or perceive themselves at risk in some way. We can see here that people who are experiencing stress, central obesity, high blood pressure and high cholesterol really would be very willing to have a genetic test. So different conditions are important. If we look at the attitudes to personalised nutrition, and we see that, again, those who have a medical condition suddenly become more favourable in their attitudes. We can see here that these different groups, those who are not interested in food based on their genetic profile are more likely to say that they have not got high cholesterol. Those that have not got high cholesterol are more likely to say, I'm going to live life to the full and forget about genetic tests, or that changing their lifestyle is enough. So the more fatalistic view, high blood pressure. Again, we have these people that are more likely, those that don't have high blood pressure are more likely to worry about how the information would be used, and more likely to be disinterested in changing their diet. Stress is interesting. We also ask people about their stress levels, and we find that people who had higher stress levels were more amenable to personalised nutrition, were more likely to be interested in changing their diet, and less likely to worry about the tests. So in conclusion, a large sample, a large group, a large segment of the European population are very open to the notion of personalised nutrition. Those who have a health problem or perceive themselves at risk may be most open to the interventions. And these findings are really quite encouraging for the future of this new revolution in health and health promotion. And before we finish, I'd just like to thank all the other people who were involved in conducting these studies in Portugal as well, Porto, and everybody, and all the people and the researchers involved in LipGene. So thank you very much for listening. You deserve a cup of coffee now. Thank you.